your predominant state of consciousness, your predominant mental emotional state, there's a certain correlation between who you associate with, where you find yourself, and even what kind of things happen to you. There is a correlation which is not always immediately recognizable, but there is a correlation between a person's predominant mental emotional state and who they are with, who their friends are, where they work, and even what happens to them. So if you are in a very negative state a long time, you tend to attract also negative events, but you can only have to find it out for yourself. I'm not saying believe me. I know it from my own life, because when I first discovered this, I was still very young. I discovered that there is a correlation between my mind activity and what happens to me. I found a book several books that somebody left with us when I was 17. And there, for the first time, I read about a person's mind, and I suddenly realized my mind was predominantly negative, because I was a very unhappy child. And so my childhood was not pleasant. And so the initial conditioning of my life was that my mind was continuously commenting and saying how bad my life was. And whenever something bad happened to me, I had a phrase that would occur again in my mind that, of course, bad things always happen to you, don't they? They're bound to happen to you. It always happens to you. So I was talking to myself and saying that bad things would always happen to me, and they did. So you can discover first, the spiritual awakening is to discover that there is continuous mind activity. And for some people, it's the discovery that a significant part of their mind activity is negative. But the vital thing is to discover that there is this continuous talk in my head, which is considered the normal human state. And of course, you cannot abolish thinking. Of course, there will be thinking. But the question is there an awareness behind the thinking? If you can become aware that you are indulging or caught up in that useless mind activity, you suddenly become aware of perhaps certain repetitive thoughts that tend to reoccur in your mind again and again. You might see it in others too, even more easily in others. When you go for your Thanksgiving dinner, I think is it next week, you will meet your family members or relatives, and some of you may realize you already know what they are going to say this year, because it's the same thing they said last year and 5 years and 10 years ago. And if they have negative judgments about you or somebody else, then it's the same thing you will hear again next week when you go to them. So it's easier to see how others are caught up in repetitive thought forms, not as easy to see it in oneself. This is why there's a saying that self-knowledge is the most difficult knowledge.